The holiday season is among us. Many of us travel and travel by car. What does that mean if we're in another state and we get in an accident? We'll talk about it today. Good morning, everybody, and happy Monday. This is your accident and injury guy, Joe with Bowers, coming at you from my Elkton office. Today, we're going to talk about insurance. Big surprise. When have I ever talked about insurance and auto accidents? So it is Thanksgiving week. A lot of people travel for the holidays. We've got more holidays coming into December and the New Year's. And with that comes travel for many, many people. And some of us travel by vehicle. In fact, those are like the busiest driving days of the year are the ones surrounding these major holidays that are often spent with families and the travel that is associated with it. So a common question that is often asked, and more so in my office because of our proximity to Delaware and Pennsylvania, and the fact that we handle so many cases that involve Delaware drivers that are in Maryland accidents, and they've got Delaware insurance policies, or Pennsylvania, and even some New Jersey insurance policies. So what happens if you are in an accident in another state? Your insurance is presumably, if you're watching this from Maryland or maybe one of those other states, but you've gotten into an accident in another state. What rules apply? This can be really tricky in some of these situations, but the baseline rule of thumb is that your insurance policy follows you, and it also follows your vehicle. To differentiate the two of these, if you are in another state, let's say that you fly. We'll even bring up that scenario where you've flown to another state to be with family for the holidays or for whatever other reason. It obviously does not need to be holiday driven. And for one reason or another, you end up in somebody else's vehicle driving and an accident happens. Well, in most scenarios, the insurance policy for the vehicle that you were in is going to be primary. There are very, very little exceptions in really odd situations. If you end up in a dispute like that, you need to be on the phone with an attorney who knows what they're doing and how to navigate these. They can be incredibly complicated. But those exceptions are very, very limited and in some very, very rare scenarios. If the insurance coverage for the vehicle that you are in, let's say, again, you're driving somebody else's vehicle, is not sufficient to cover the damages. And that can come in a variety of ways. And we're not going to get into the particular of the who pays what and why, not in this video. A lot of that's been discussed about in previous podcast episodes. I'm sure we'll cover it again in future podcast episodes, but we're talking about generic payments made and is there enough insurance coverage? Your personal policy also follows you, so it will become a secondary policy to the vehicle that you were driving, no matter what state you were in. Now, on the other side, let's say that you are driving your vehicle and you're in another state, your insurance is going to be primary. And more importantly, the limits of insurance that you have on your policy should apply in the other state that you're in. Now, there are some scenarios in which if the minimum insurance limits, and this is something we've talked about on many, many, many of these episodes for different reasons, if you're in a state where their mandatory minimum insurance limits for some type of coverage, and this could be for your liability coverage, it could be for personal injury protection coverage, it could be your uninsured motorist, it could be a number of different things. If there's a mandatory requirement in the state you're driving in to have higher limits than your policy does already, because maybe that state requires higher limits than Maryland does, or wherever you might be listening to, because we see a lot of this with Delaware drivers. Their minimums are slightly lower than Maryland's. Pennsylvania's are about half. But when those drivers are driving here in Maryland, a lot of those policies require them to bump up that coverage to the minimum of the state that they're in. That may apply. So your insurance company may need to pay more money based on the state that the accident was in. This is not going to affect your premiums if this happens. They understand that we exist in a world where we get in these vehicles and we drive them, and sometimes we drive them to faraway places. We have dealt with interesting scenarios, specifically when a driver that, a Maryland driver that we have gets in an accident in a state like New Jersey. Their personal injury protection limits are so much higher than ours here in Maryland. And the insurance company, your insurance company, because they're in an accident in New Jersey, has to jump up to that higher limit and pay quite a bit more. Sometimes that's a benefit if somebody's got higher limits into Maryland. Sometimes if they're a New Jersey driver here in Maryland, they're going to get the benefit of those higher limits that are already happening. So there's a lot of different scenarios. It can be incredibly confusing, but understand that the key point here is that your insurance policy is going to follow you. It's also going to follow your vehicle. So obviously we've talked about the different ways in which those could present. So it's super important, though. You may want to call your insurance agent before you're going to go on a trip out of state. Let the insurance agent know what states you're going to be driving through, and if there are any concerns about differences in coverage, because you can change and adjust that policy to make sure that there are no questions, there are no gaps, there is no confusion ahead of time. Because even though your agent may not be, and probably isn't, depending on where you're traveling to, licensed to sell you insurance in that state, it's okay, because you don't need to buy insurance specific to the state. You just might want to update your policy so that if you are in an accident and there is a drastic difference in coverage, you're not dealing with as much messiness of having that corrected on the back end. It's much easier to do it ahead of time. Just like any of the other guidance and advice that I've given in the months that we've been doing this podcast, or any of the other content on our website, you got to look at that stuff before something happens, not after it happens. If you go to make a change on a policy, but you were in an accident yesterday, that change is only going to help you moving forward. It's not going to go back in time. So I always give this guidance. I always give this suggestion. You need to be looking at your insurance policy. There is tons and tons of content on this channel that will tell you how you can do that on your own, how you can contact my office to have that done absolutely free. We don't sell insurance here, as I've said numerous times before. There's not going to be a sales pitch at the end, but feel free, email that policy to info@bowerslawmd.com or give my office a call at 885-6200, especially if you are an out-of-state driver that's been involved in a Maryland accident, especially if it was here in Cecil County. Please call us. We have a lot of experience navigating with these out-of-state policies. Also, if you are a Maryland driver who was in an accident in another state, don't hesitate to call us. We have relationships with attorneys in more than half of the states in the U.S. We can make sure, because there are elements to these cases where they may start off, and we deal with this all the time in Delaware and Pennsylvania. We have colleagues that we trust. We have colleagues that we have been working with for years and years and years. And it is a smooth transition to work together with the Delaware attorney to handle the Delaware parts. And then there are parts of it that are very Maryland specific that we work together to make sure that everything is done to get you the best recovery and best results for the case, especially in these multi-state situations that can be incredibly confusing, because the rules on how the insurance coverage applies varies so much from one state to the next. There are parts of a Maryland policy and things that we can do here in Maryland that are absolutely required here and definitely not required in Delaware. On the other side, they have certain minimums to some parts of their policies in Delaware that are much higher than in Maryland, and others that are even lower than in Maryland. So I've dealt with hundreds of clients over the years that have had some crossover between Maryland, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, even some of the more confusing ones where there was a Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania component to it all mixed in. The best part is that if you are dealing with a situation like this and you're already starting to like pull your hair out, just stop. Call us. We have navigated this situation numerous times, and we will happily navigate this situation for you to guarantee that you get the best outcome possible given the situation. And as always, the sooner you call us, the better, because there are certain elements about these certain orders in which if this pays first versus that pays first, it can turn into a substantial difference to you at the very end of the claim with more money in your pocket. And who doesn't want more money in their pocket? Well, that's kind of part of the reason why you end up calling us. So as always, we've got no drawing today with the holiday week. My anticipation as I'm seeing is that we were going to have a little bit less on the live feed. So we didn't even bother to set up a drawing. We are going to be off next week. So next Monday, I'm going to be out of the country. That is Monday, December 2nd. We will be back here with another podcast episode on Monday the 9th. So look forward to that. In the meantime, if you have specific questions, whether they are related to an auto accident or some other sort of situation, shoot us an email, info@bowerslawmd.com. Do it sooner rather than later, especially with this gap between episodes. If you've got something that you've got a question about that is a topic that is not within the auto accident world, now is the time. Give me the time frame to line up the expert, line up the professional that knows what they're doing in that area. As you've seen numerous times before, I will get them on the podcast. We will interview them. We will talk to them about it. And again, any of these inquiries that you send in here for questions are absolutely confidential. So if you have a very, very specific situation and question, we're going to synthesize that and turn it around into a question that is a very generic situation. I'm also behind the scenes going to connect you with whichever colleague it is has the answer to that question. And I'm going to do that well before the podcast episode. So do not hesitate. If you've got a question about something that is not auto accident related, that is not injury related, reach out, because I've got a growing and strong network of attorneys who, if I don't do it, they handle it, and they're really, really great. So you're not just getting the impact of me doing a Google search and saying, hey, call this firm. If I'm referring somebody to you, if I'm bringing them on this podcast, I know that they know what they're talking about. So hopefully that was helpful for you all in light of us coming up on the holiday season and the travel season. Again, this is your accident and injury attorney right here in my Elkton office, Joe Bowers, signing off for the week. Have a great week. Enjoy the holiday. Again, we won't see you next week, but we'll see you again in 2 weeks, December 9th, 10 a.m. Be well, everybody. Be safe out.